In the heart of American culinary culture, there exists a dessert, both beloved and contested. The key lime pie, sweet, tangy, and undeniably iconic. This pie has sparked heated debates, not just over recipes, but over its very birthplace. Was it born in the tropical sun of Florida's Keys, or conceived in the bustling kitchens of New York City? This isn't just a debate about flavor. It's about identity, heritage, and the power of food to symbolize place. And tonight, we trace the mystery, the myths, and the truth behind the key lime pie. What makes this dessert more than just a pie is the way it has evolved. Like many dishes passed down through generations, it is not defined by a single moment of invention, but by gradual transformation. A culinary evolution shaped by migration, trade, agricultural trends, and yes, the persistent human urge to claim ownership of something delicious. But to begin, we must recognize the complications of definition itself. What exactly is a key lime pie? The question seems simple, yet the answers splinter into dozens of variations. Today, most Americans picture a creamy filling made from key limes, sweetened condensed milk, and often egg yolks, nestled inside a graham cracker crust. But travel through old cookbooks and newspapers, and the picture becomes more chaotic. Versions with evaporated milk, cornstarch, gelatin, or even green food dye. Some pies crowned with snowy meringue, others capped with whipped cream, and the crust. Sometimes pastry, sometimes graham crackers, sometimes little more than pressed crumbs. This complexity is not trivial. Each version reflects a moment in American food history. Whether it was the practical ingenuity of home bakers in Depression-era Florida, or the industrial innovations of the Borden Company promoting condensed milk nationwide. Even the battle of meringue versus whipped cream reflects broader shifts in culinary fashion, regional preference, and access to ingredients. One of the earliest surviving recipes that resembles today's standard form was printed in 1933 in the Florida Keys. There, amid the humid air and swaying palms, a woman named Mabel McClanahan at 313 William Street in Key West recorded what she called tropical lime pie. Her recipe was simple but revolutionary. Condensed milk, evaporated milk, egg yolks, strained lime juice, poured into a buttered tin, lined with graham cracker crumbs, topped with a glossy meringue, then baked until golden. On paper, it is straightforward. In reality, it marked a turning point. A local household dish stepping onto the stage of national culinary recognition. But even the context of its publication was strange, almost unsettling. The recipe appeared in a Florida newspaper immediately after a grim report on 3 executions at the state prison. A stark reminder that history doesn't always respect neat divisions. Tragedy and sweetness, death and dessert, printed side by side. It is in this way that food history often collides with larger cultural narratives. Yet, beyond the recipe's instructions lies another issue. Practicality. McClanahan's crust relied on loose graham crumbs pressed against the tin, a technique prone to crumbling. Modern bakers, and indeed even experimental cooks of the 1930s, would realize something else was needed. A binding agent. Melted butter, perhaps a touch of sugar, pressed into crumbs and baked, turned chaos into stability. This is a small detail, but one that reveals a deeper truth. Recipes are rarely fixed. They adapt, shift, and survive only when people experiment and refine them. But let us step back. Why condensed milk? Why limes? And why the Keys? To answer that, we must look at the flows of trade and the challenges of geography. Key limes, also known as Mexican limes, are not native to Florida. They were brought centuries earlier, likely by Spanish explorers and traders moving plants across the Caribbean. Their unique traits, small, seed, heavy, with a thinner rind and sharper aroma, made them distinct from the Persian limes that dominate grocery stores today. Their presence in the Florida Keys was no accident. The subtropical climate created an ideal microenvironment for cultivation. Yet, they were fragile, vulnerable to storms, and never produced on the industrial scale of other citrus fruits. Enter condensed milk, developed in the mid-19th century by Gail Borden. Condensed milk was a product of necessity, a way to preserve milk without refrigeration. Vital for soldiers during the Civil War and later for families living in regions where fresh dairy was scarce. By the early 20th century, it had become a household staple, and in the Florida Keys, a region with limited dairy infrastructure, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Fresh cream soured quickly in the heat. Condensed milk offered shelf-stable luxury, a way to create custards and pies where otherwise none could exist. Thus, the marriage was almost inevitable. Local limes providing zest and acidity, condensed milk offering sweetness and texture, eggs binding it all together. Together, they created a dessert greater than the sum of its parts. But history is never that simple. In the Florida Keys, one story circulates like legend, the tale of Aunt Sally. A cook in the home of William Curry, Florida's first self-made millionaire. In the late 19th century, it is said, she observed Cuban sponge divers combining lime juice, condensed milk, and eggs into a simple dish aboard their boats. Inspired, she transformed the concoction into a pie. And so, the first key lime pie was born. Or so the story goes. The problem, there is little to no evidence that Aunt Sally ever existed. Census data from the Curry household show no record of such a cook. Historians have speculated whether she was a family member instead, perhaps Sarah Jane Lowe Curry, nicknamed Sally. But here too, the trail grows cold, and skeptics argue that Aunt Sally may have been less a real person and more a convenient myth. A placeholder name, like John Doe, that filled the void where history had left silence. Meanwhile, another origin story emerges far from the Keys. In 1931, the Borden Company launched a radio campaign promoting recipes using their Eagle brand condensed milk. Among them, a magic lemon meringue pie, startlingly similar to modern key lime pie. Some food historians argue that Florida homemakers may have simply adapted this recipe, swapping lemons for the more available key limes. In this telling, the famous pie was not born from sponges and sunshine, but from corporate marketing and radio waves. Which story is true? Perhaps neither, perhaps both. Or perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between. In the unseen kitchens of everyday people whose recipes were never published, whose pies never left their homes, but whose innovations quietly shaped the traditions we now celebrate. And so, as we look back at these contested origins, one thing becomes clear. The key lime pie is more than dessert. It is a story of cultural exchange, of economic necessity, of how local ingredients and industrial products collided to create something enduring. It is a reflection of Florida's fragile ecosystems, its vulnerable citrus groves, and its reliance on trade. It is a reminder of how identity is forged, not just through people, but through the food they share. By the middle of the 20th century, the key lime pie was no longer just food. It was politics, tourism, and money. What began as a humble household recipe had become an emblem of Floridian identity. And with that came conflict. Florida, especially the Keys, had long marketed itself as a tropical paradise within the United States. A place of escape, sun, and exotic flavors. Tourists sought authenticity, and locals sought to sell it. A pie that could be branded as uniquely Floridian carried not just cultural weight, but economic value. Restaurants could lure customers with the promise of real key lime pie. Bakeries could distinguish themselves as guardians of tradition. And eventually, legislators would attempt to codify authenticity into law. The problem was, no one agreed on what authentic meant. The crust wars for some, the pie's soul was in its filling. The creamy, tangy custard of lime juice, condensed milk, and eggs. Everything else was negotiable. For others, however, the crust was sacred. Pastry crust loyalists argued that early pies were closer to custard pies and thus deserved a flaky base. Graham cracker advocates countered that, by the 1930s, commercial graham crackers had revolutionized home baking, providing ease and texture that quickly became the norm. The debate wasn't merely culinary. It was generational, class-driven, and even regional. Older Floridians clung to pastry crusts, while the booming tourist economy embraced graham crackers. As part of the modern American pie experience, meringue versus whipped cream, then came the topping wars. Meringue, with its golden peaks, was seen as traditional, a way to use up leftover egg whites after yolks went into the filling. But whipped cream, smooth and decadent, rose to prominence after World War II, as industrial dairy production and refrigeration became widespread. What began as practicality became ideology. To this day, key lime pie enthusiasts spar bitterly over which topping is true, as though the pie's authenticity were on trial in every slice. The green scandal. And then there was the matter of color. In its natural form, a key lime pie is pale yellow, sometimes with a faint green tint from the juice. But in the mid-20th century, marketing campaigns, especially in northern states, began promoting neon green pies, tinted with food coloring. They were eye-catching, commercially appealing, but to purists, sacrilege. To Floridians, green pies symbolized cultural theft, a manufactured distortion of their heritage. By the 1980s, green key lime pie had become a culinary slur, shorthand for inauthenticity. The law gets involved, the debates reached such a fever pitch that in 1965, Florida State Representative Bernie Pappy Jr. of Key West introduced a bill to fine restaurants $100 for advertising key lime pie that wasn't made with authentic key limes. The bill failed, but the attempt signaled how serious the matter had become. It wasn't just about pie anymore. It was about protecting regional identity in the face of commercialization. Decades later, in 2006, Florida officially designated key lime pie as the state pie, cementing its symbolic status. But the law could not resolve the deeper question. Who owns the story? New York's counterclaim, because even as Florida fought to defend its claim, whispers persisted from farther north. New York City, with its bustling immigrant food culture and thriving dessert scene, had long been associated with cream pies, cheesecakes, and citrus custards. Some food historians argue that versions of lime pies circulated in New York kitchens well before Florida claimed them. Newspaper clippings from the early 20th century feature icebox lemon lime pies that bear striking resemblance to what later became key lime pie. Could it be, then, that the so-called Floridian dessert was simply a New York creation, exported southward and rebranded under palm trees? Proponents of this theory point again to Borden's corporate influence. The company's promotional campaigns were based in the Northeast, and it is entirely possible that Floridians adapted existing lemon-lime custard pies, already circulating in places like New York, to their local fruit. If true, Florida's great culinary symbol might be less a story of origin and more a story of appropriation. Beyond food, a symbolic battlefield. But the controversy reveals more than a recipe dispute. It highlights how foods become battlegrounds for identity. Just as Philadelphia defends its cheesesteak, or Naples guards its pizza, Florida clings to key lime pie as a marker of authenticity. It's not just about taste. It's about history, ownership, and belonging. To question Florida's claim is to question the keys themselves, their distinctness, their independence, their very role in America's cultural imagination. This is why the stakes are so high. In Key West, bakeries advertise the original key lime pie with an air of reverence. Tourists flock to taste it, believing they are participating in something ancient, almost sacred. Meanwhile, rival claims from New York or corporate America threaten to puncture that mythology, to reduce a cherished cultural symbol to mere marketing. And so, the pie endures as a paradox. A dish at once simple and endlessly complicated. Its ingredients are few, its preparation straightforward. Yet the meaning layered upon it by marketers, lawmakers, bakers, and diners makes it one of the most contested desserts in American history, and the debate is far from over. Because beneath the surface lies a deeper question. Not just where the pie was born, but whether it can even be said to have a birthplace at all. To understand the key lime pie, we must step far beyond the Florida Keys or New York bakeries. Because, at its core, this is not just an American dessert. It is a product of global movement, of colonization, migration, and the shifting tides of trade. The lime's long journey, the fruit at the heart of the pie, the key lime, is not Floridian at all. Botanically, it traces back to Southeast Asia. Arab traders carried limes into North Africa and the Mediterranean around the 10th century. Centuries later, Spanish and Portuguese explorers transported them across the Atlantic, embedding them in the colonial agricultural systems of the Caribbean. By the 16th century, limes were flourishing in the West Indies, where their resistance to heat and salt made them ideal for island cultivation. In the 1700s and 1800s, limes gained an infamous reputation on the seas. British naval officers carried them aboard ships to combat scurvy, earning sailors the nickname limeys. What saved lives at sea would later sweeten pies on land. And when Spanish explorers and Cuban traders moved plants into Florida's Keys, the fruit settled into its new subtropical home. But the Florida Keys were never a stronghold of large-scale agriculture. The soil was thin, the storms relentless. Limes grew wild, often in backyards or small groves, never in industrial quantities. That scarcity is part of what gave them their mystique. They were fragile, rare, and deeply tied to the landscape. The Cuban connection, if the fruit came from Asia and the milk from northern factories, the cultural bridge between them was Cuba. Just 90 miles from Key West, Havana was both neighbor and influence. Cuban sponge divers and fishermen worked in Florida waters throughout the 19th century, bringing with them culinary traditions that blended Spanish, African, and Caribbean flavors. One persistent theory holds that sponge divers, lacking fresh dairy, mixed lime juice with condensed milk and eggs on their boats. A quick, filling custard hardened by acidity. This proto-key lime pie, born not in kitchens but on the sea, may have seeded Florida's later versions. Moreover, Cuban cuisine had long paired citrus with custards, flan de limon, pastel de leche condensada, and other lime-infused sweets circulated widely in Havana's cookbooks. It is no coincidence that the Florida Keys, culturally and economically tied to Cuba, absorbed these flavors and techniques. The pie, then, may not be purely Floridian or New Yorker, but part of a trans-Caribbean food network where ingredients and ideas crossed waters as easily as people did. The industrial ingredient condensed milk, however, was the turning point. Developed by Gail Borden in the mid-19th century, condensed milk was not simply a kitchen product. It was a triumph of industrial food science. By evaporating water and adding sugar, milk could be preserved for months without refrigeration. During the Civil War, Union soldiers carried it into battle. Afterward, it spread into American households, promoted aggressively by the Borden Company. In the tropics, condensed milk was more than convenience. It was survival. In the Florida Keys, where cows were scarce and fresh dairy spoiled in hours, condensed milk allowed for custards, creams, and pies that would otherwise have been impossible. Its availability in general stores coincided perfectly with the presence of wild limes. Together, they created a culinary inevitability. And yet, condensed milk was never neutral. It represented industrialization, corporate marketing, and the creeping influence of northern companies into southern kitchens. The pie, then, is both local invention and corporate product. A dessert born at the intersection of home cooking and advertising. Trade, scarcity, and substitution. By the mid-20th century, key limes themselves began to vanish. A devastating hurricane in 1926 wiped out many groves. Later, a citrus blight further weakened production. Farmers gradually replaced fragile key lime trees with Persian limes, which were larger, hardier, and more commercially viable. This substitution transformed the pie once again. Bakers outside of Florida, unable to find true key limes, used Persian limes instead. The flavor was mellower, less floral, but easier to market. Eventually, bottled key lime juice, often colored green, became the standard in grocery stores. What was once tied to the land and seasonality now became shelf-stable, shipped nationwide, divorced from its origins. Here lies the irony. The desert most associated with Florida is today rarely made with Floridian fruit. Most commercial key lime products rely on limes imported from Mexico or bottled juice processed thousands of miles away. The authentic pie, in a sense, has always been slipping out of Florida's grasp. The broader pattern, and this pattern, is not unique. Many regional dishes are products of displacement and substitution. The tomato, now essential to Italian cuisine, originated in the Americas. The potato, a staple of Ireland, came from the Andes. Chili peppers, iconic in Indian and Thai cooking, were brought from Central America by Portuguese traders. In the same way, key lime pie belongs not to one place, but to a web of places. To the farmers of Southeast Asia who first cultivated the lime, to the Arab merchants who carried it across deserts, to the Spanish and Caribbean colonists who planted it in the New World, to the Cuban sailors who cooked with it, to the American corporations who canned the milk that bound it together, and finally, to the Floridian homemakers and restaurators who claimed it as their own. The question, then, is not whether the pie belongs to Florida or New York, but whether any food can ever belong to one place at all. By the late 20th century, the battle over key lime pie had shifted from kitchens and cookbooks into the realm of branding, law, and tourism marketing. What had once been a humble custard had become a cultural commodity, fiercely defended, aggressively marketed, and endlessly contested. Tourism and the authenticity economy. Florida's economy thrived on tourism. The Keys, in particular, relied on their image as a unique, tropical outpost. American, but with an exotic flair. In this narrative, key lime pie was not just desert. It was edible heritage, a way for visitors to taste the keys. Restaurants competed to advertise the original, the oldest, or the most authentic. Key lime pie, bakeries turned slices into postcards. Travel brochures proclaimed it a must-have experience, as essential as snorkeling or sunset at Mallory Square. In effect, key lime pie became part of Florida's brand identity, no different from oranges or theme parks. But the very act of branding authenticity only deepened the divisions. What counted as real? Who had the authority to decide? The legal arena. In 1965, State Representative Bernie Pappy Jr.'s failed bill to fine restaurants for selling fake key lime pies was the first major attempt to legislate authenticity. At the time, it seemed almost humorous, a politician fighting over dessert while the state faced larger challenges. But the proposal reflected something deeper, the recognition that authenticity could be monetized, and that protecting it meant protecting local business. 4 decades later, the battle was won symbolically. In 2006, the Florida legislature declared key lime pie the official state pie. The law was largely ceremonial, but it mattered. It gave Floridians legal recognition of something they had long claimed culturally. It was a declaration that this pie was not just food, but heritage. Still, the law left unanswered questions. Could a pie made with bottled juice from Mexico be called authentic? Did meringue count, or whipped cream? Did pastry crusts invalidate a claim to tradition? The statute offered no clarity. In the absence of specifics, the disputes raged on. Marketing battles, meanwhile, corporations capitalized on the pie's growing fame. Grocery stores stocked key lime yogurt, key lime soda, key lime cheesecake. The flavor profile, tart, creamy, tropical, became detached from the actual fruit or pie, reduced to artificial flavorings and green coloring. To purists, this was cultural theft. To corporations, it was just business. But either way, the effect was the same. Key lime pie had left the Keys and entered the global marketplace, often in forms unrecognizable to its supposed tradition. The lawsuits and trademarks the pie also made its way into courtrooms. Restaurants trademarked names like the original Key Lime Pie Company or Key West Key Lime Pie Factory, sparking disputes over who had the right to market themselves as authentic. Bakeries sued one another over branding. Small-town festivals fought over which community could claim to host the official Key Lime Pie contest. In these conflicts, authenticity became a weapon, not in flavor, but in legal filings. Lawyers, not bakers, became the new arbiters of tradition. The tourist's slice for visitors. However, the controversies only heightened the appeal. To order a slice of key lime pie in Key West is not just to eat, it is to participate in a ritual, to consume a piece of contested heritage. Tourists often arrive with an almost reverent curiosity. Is it really different here? Does it taste more authentic, more Floridian? Restaurants oblige with storytelling. Waiters recount the history of sponge divers, or the failed 1965 authenticity law, or the pie's designation as Florida's state dessert. The slice arrives not just with whipped cream or meringue, but with a narrative, a culinary souvenir. Cultural capital and culinary irony, and yet, the irony remains. Most key lime pies sold in Florida today are not made with local fruit. Commercial limes often come from Mexico. Bottled juice dominates, and the ties to the land grow ever thinner. What is sold as authentic is often geographically and historically divorced from its roots. This tension between story and substance, branding and reality, defines the modern era of key lime pie. It is not just dessert. It is a cultural product, shaped as much by marketing departments and lawmakers as by bakers. And in that sense, the pie embodies a larger truth about food in the modern world. Authenticity itself has become an industry. Key lime pie is more than a dessert. It is a case study in authenticity and the difficulty, perhaps impossibility, of pinning it down. The illusion of purity. Every culture claims authentic foods, yet almost all of them are hybrids. Pasta arrived in Italy via trade with Asia. The Irish potato came from the Andes. Chiles transformed Indian cuisine only after Portuguese merchants carried them from Central America. In each case, what seems timeless and essential is, in fact, the result of migration, commerce, and adaptation. Key lime pie follows the same pattern. Its lime came from Southeast Asia, its condensed milk from northern factories, its Cuban culinary echoes from across the Straits of Florida. Even its very name, key lime, masks substitution and scarcity, as Persian limes or bottled juice now dominate. To insist on authenticity is to chase a moving target. Performed authenticity, and yet, people want authenticity. They crave the sense of connection that comes from eating something rooted in place, in tradition, in history. In Florida, the pie fulfills that need. Restaurants present it as a slice of heritage. Legislators sanctify it as a symbol of state identity. Tourists taste it in search of the real keys. But authenticity here is less an ingredient than a performance. It is enacted through storytelling, through ceremony, through law. A pie made from bottled juice in a Key West diner may feel more authentic to a visitor than a technically truer pie baked elsewhere, simply because of context. The story becomes the flavor. The economic stakes. This performance of authenticity is not neutral. It carries economic weight. Declaring key lime pie as Florida's state dessert boosts tourism, sells cookbooks, justifies branding, and fuels festivals. Authenticity becomes a kind of cultural currency, traded in restaurants, legislatures, and courtrooms. But when authenticity is monetized, it risks hollowing itself out. The more it is marketed, the more it becomes a slogan. Detached from the messy, complex histories that gave rise to it, authenticity as a process. Perhaps the mistake lies in treating authenticity as a fixed quality, like a chemical property of the pie itself. Instead, it may be more accurate to see it as a process, something continually negotiated, debated, and redefined. In that sense, every key lime pie is both authentic and inauthentic. Authentic in that it connects to a lineage of ingredients, practices, and stories. Inauthentic in that no single lineage can claim it fully. The closing reflection. So when you pick up a fork in Key West, or New York, or anywhere else, and cut into the custard of a key lime pie, what are you really tasting? A Floridian tradition, a Cuban echo, a Southeast Asian fruit, a northern factory's invention, or the carefully marketed story of all these things combined? Maybe the answer is all of the above. Maybe authenticity is not a matter of purity, but of layers. The accumulation of journeys, substitutions, and reinventions. Key lime pie, then, does not belong to Florida or New York alone. It belongs to movement itself. To migration, trade, scarcity, invention, branding, and memory. Its authenticity lies not in what it is, but in how fiercely people argue over it. And perhaps that is the most authentic thing of all.